Okay, we are live. Hello, social media. We are here on another episode of Leadership Live, not High. That's a different conversation. I'm here with my buddy Chris Pinkowski, and we're and today we're going to be talking about preparation and planning, which is kind of a different spin from the type of things we normally talk about. But how are you today, Chris?
I'm great, JJ. It's Friday. It's summer. It's officially the first day of summer. Um, so yeah, good day so far, and looking forward to a good summer. How about you?
Well, it's a good day. I have no complaints. I mean, it's not as hot as it has been, even though we are going to hit 90 again today. But it's not pouring down rain like it was yesterday. We needed that rain, though. My
Okay.
plants are so happy today.
Yeah. We've been having a heat wave all week, and I think it's going to go into next week. So it's been freaking brutal in Philadelphia.
When your grass is barely growing in the middle of summer, you know that it's too long without rain, and it's probably hotter than hell.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
So preparation and planning. I'm going to let you start off with what your opinion is there. But when I say preparation and planning, what does that mean to you? And what are some things that you've done in your past to do both of those things?
Preparation and planning are so important for achieving goals. Like if you don't plan for your goals, first it starts with setting goals, right? And then when you don't plan and prepare to achieve them, then the chances of you failing are pretty much right on target. What's the old saying? Prepare to
If you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
succeed or succeed in failing. Something like that. Now I'm way off there. But yeah, preparation, when I think of the terms preparation and planning, they are two separate things that go hand in hand. The planning comes first, and that's laying out what are the steps to achieve a goal, and what are the main steps, and what are the sub steps in between to hit those milestones. Once you've laid out your plan, now you've got to prepare to execute. And preparing is not only assembling what are the resources that you need, what are the tools, the people, the processes, but it's also, and you may even get into this from the military side, JJ, but it's that PACE mentality, right? Which your primary, your alternate, your contingency, and your emergency. So it's not just a primary plan, but you've got to have your backups in place so that if and when something fails, the entire process doesn't fail. You've got backups.
Yep. You know what? It's just a different spin on it. Was what I was going to brief, but you're spot on. First of all, before you even go into the planning process, you have to do the goal setting, like you said. But I like to use the backward planning concept. So first, you kind of have to understand what the overall mission is supposed to be.
Yep.
Before you can even backwards plan to start putting together your initial whatever. I mean, so when you do that, I mean, you got to understand just the basic part, right? I am going to go out and I'm going to I'm going to go to the airport on May 15th and I'm going to fly to Florida. Mm-hmm. Well, what are all the things that you have to do leading up to that, right? So that's probably a really small example as compared to most workplace examples. But, when you break it down easy like that, you got to book your tickets. You're going to have to travel to the airport. So you got to figure out what your lead time is to get there. So that's going to be one of those things. You got to figure out how many bags you want to take. You got to figure out how much they're allowed to weigh, what the dimensions are allowed to be. You got to figure out, what time you're going to get to the next place, so that, you have that, you can have that conversation with whoever's picking you up. Or if you're just showing up there solo, you got to figure out what that rental car and hotel situation is going to look like, or taxi cab and hotel situation is going to look like. So when it comes to backwards planning, it's getting to that end state. You know you're doing a certain thing and figuring out everything that you need to know. I'll call it coordinating instructions to make sure that that one thing can happen.
Yes.
And you name the resources and all that stuff. I mean, that's basically, in a nutshell, basically everything that I said. But then you go into mission analysis. You start getting around a round table if it's a big enough sort of operation that you're doing, and all the way down the line, your pace plan is kind of when you understand what that overall operation looks like. It's taking those 4 things and figuring out how you can measure your success along the way.
Yeah. It's something that a lot of people overlook, I think. The importance of I think people understand that it's important to plan, right? In theory. In practice, I don't know that a lot of people do it as well as they should. But then the preparation part, I think, is where the wheels can tend to fall off the train. And, all the best laid plans sound awesome on paper and they sound great when you're talking about it. But when the rubber meets the road, if you're not prepared for what may come down the road as you're moving towards that goal, that's really when things can take a turn for the worse.
You're right. And, once you start that execution, it's going to be ugly anyway. But the more you prepare and the more you plan, and one thing that the military does really well is they war game the whole thing, right? So they do rock drills, and they prefer, if it's a big enough operation, they literally get all the people at the table or maybe even out in a field, and they set up stations. Okay, we start here, we move from here, and then this is the next step, and then the next step, and then the next step. And they go all the way through it, which I believe for any decent size operation, it should happen. If you are not going through the steps, then on the day of execution, somebody is going to miss something. Even if it's that guy that when you're loading a rail car needs to put the spanner between each rail car, you know what? If they forget that loader or whatever you're driving from rail car to rail car, as you're filling that thing up, is going to go boom.
That's right.
And, that's one small thing that one person has to do when you're executing that small part of the operation. But if they don't know, then they don't know. And if you didn't tell them, then it's your fault.
Right. And one thing that I have found is that people don't differentiate the two. They think that planning and preparation is one and the same.
Mm-mm.
And it is absolutely not. So how have you helped people to differentiate in their minds and in their processes what's different about those two and the fact that they are not the same?
Okay, so the difference between the two is when you have a plan, that is just the action, the overall steps of the actions that everybody's going to be taking.
Right.
The preparation part comes with the resources and the personnel. And the resources and the personnel can be anything. So let's just use that initial example that I talked about in the very beginning of going to the airport and flying to wherever the heck you're going.
Mm-hmm.
There's a personnel and an equipment piece. I talked about the luggage. That's equipment. Yes. If you don't figure that part out, you can't take anything with you. And by the way, you need to figure out what requirements the plane has, because guess what? It's not just the luggage. If you have a carry-on, can't take a lighter, can't take a knife, but you can potentially take some of those things, not all of those things, and pack it in something that gets stowed away if it's packaged properly and you let them know.
Correct.
And I thought they were the same, just different wording. Absolutely not, Michael. And feel free while we're talking this out to ask as many questions as possible, because sometimes it's hard to articulate. Yeah. Sometimes you gotta take an operation and do the planning and preparation process so that you understand what the difference is. But then there's the equipment. We got that. So we know we got our bags. We know we got our requirements to pack those bags. We have already figured out what needs to go in those bags because we're going to be there for 5 days. We know we have a washer and dryer, so we don't really need a ton of things. But now we're getting ready to get to the point where we might need some external requirements, right? So this is also preparation, and this is not just planning. So it's more than just having a conversation at this point, because now you're going to have to start picking up the phone and probably making some arrangements or going on the computer and actually booking things to make sure things go right. Preparation. Now, have you booked that flight? Ooh, that's interesting. It's not part of the planning process to prepare that flight. You talked about the flight, but now you got to book it. That's a requirement that needs to be taken care of. And oh, by the way, that requires funding. So how much money is it going to cost? And if you're in a business, you need to be able to allocate those funds to that so you understand what you're taking away from your profits. So there's the flight. Now, how am I getting there? Do I have a friend taking me? Do I got to book a taxi? Do I got to do an Uber? Am I driving myself there and now I have to pay for parking? Whatever that cost is, that's another thing that you got to figure out. And by the way, there might be some phone calls or some actual booking that you have to do to make that happen. And I'm only going to talk about the on the way there to the airport, because now we've booked the flight. But you got to think of those same things when you're returning. The only other additional thing that you have to think of for your return flight is, am I going to take home any souvenirs? And then you might have to pack an additional bag in your carry-on so that you can stow it underneath the bird. But you know, when you take something so simple as a flight, there's a lot of preparation that goes into that. And so think of a major operation in a warehouse or a construction site, or even if you're working in a convenience store or something like that. There are a lot of micro tasks that need to be discussed, and that's why that rock drill, so that's the rehearsal part that I talked about that is so important, comes into play, because then you're getting everybody at the table that's going to be involved, and you're saying, okay, now it's your turn. Show me what you're going to do. And I'm not going to go on any more of a rant there, but that's basically what the preparation process looks like.
Well, JJ, I want to add on there too, because preparation also needs to take into account second and third order effects and other extraneous things. So we'll use the same example of, we're going away on a vacation and we've booked our flight, booked our hotel, we've got all that stuff. And now my wife and I both work. How do we need to prepare in our jobs to be off for a week from work? How do we need to prepare for our dogs to be boarded somewhere, or someone to come stay at our house and watch the dogs? Take care of our plants, the mail. Like, what are all of the other extraneous things that have to happen in order for that plan to be executed? Those are all the preparation points. You've got to be looking beyond what is just me getting to the airport, jumping on a plane, landing on a tropical island, coming back, etc. There's a whole string of other things that require preparation. And the same is true for a project that you're working on, when it's retrofitting a warehouse or it's launching a new marketing campaign. There are other things that are associated that need to be considered in your preparation and your planning.
It's true. And you know what? You should have more than one for each of those major things. And we call that course of action development. So I've always been taught, and then I would also teach my subordinates or other people that were technically senior to me, but they were young and didn't really know their ass from their elbow. So, you know, we kind of have to help those people out because they're brand new. They were smart, just brand new. So you always go 3 deep. So you have your initial plan. Okay, what if this fails here? 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 Mm-hmm. You need to know that you can jump in right at that point and do something else. And then all those other things and all those other people that are going to be involved in that process have to be included when you make those decisions of when it's going to happen, and all these things are going to change, because they need to know that no, they're not putting that spanner on there anymore. They're going to be driving a truck over from the motor pool and backing it up to a ramp instead, because that train didn't arrive that day.
Yep.
And so everyone in the process needs to understand it. That's why the joint planning comes into play, because when you plan together, you need to prepare together as well. And when you execute, then that means all those same people are there.
Yeah. And, like you said, JJ, for every point along the way, every benchmark, you've got to have something prepared for either something's going to fail, some kind of backup system, some kind of, hey, we realize at this benchmark that we need to make a slight course correction. We need to be prepared for that, or at least there needs to be some forethought so that can happen.
Yep. I mean, we would go so deep when we would load these trucks or trains or ships or airplanes too, because then we do this a year out, because what if while we're driving all this stuff onto whatever conveyance we're loading, what if we don't have enough licensed drivers? Well, what if that person has to pull a trailer, but they don't have the trailer endorsement? What if it's the first time they've ever driven it? Well, we need to make sure we're letting this person get a certain amount of drive time in. In addition to that, if there's going to be any sort of special equipment that's going to be required to use while they're loading that stuff and tying it down, they have to have training on how to do that as well. So there's just so much that can go into an operation sometimes. And by the way, that stuff is more complicated than most of the stuff that you would see in a lot of the other workplaces. But I'm a former transportation guy, so that's where my mind lives. So the stuff that if we didn't plan and prepare properly, people would literally get hurt. You know how many pinch points there are on a railhead? So many.
Yeah.
You know how likely it is that somebody's going to get run over if you're in a staging lot and they weren't prepped on every single point that we were going to move. I mean, I've seen it happen. So it's just, that stuff gets so serious for me. And the planning and preparation is so important, because if you're doing something, by the way, I have to take a step back from that. No matter how well you plan and prepare, something is always going to get screwed up. There's a human element to this, but the more planning and preparation that you do, don't overdo it, but get it to a point where everyone is comfortable and then go for it. But you got to do this so that you can mitigate risk assessments, the whole 9 yards. All of that is part of this process, because you don't want people getting hurt. You don't want people missing out on picking their kids up from the daycare center because that was something that wasn't planned when you had a late operation or whatever the case may be. All of these things have to be discussed.
Yep. Preparation really takes into account, like, what are the things that, and Michael actually said it in the comments here, what are the things that either I can't control or I can't foresee? So, for me, it goes back to the old Boy Scout days, right? And the motto was be prepared. It's carrying the first aid kit in your vehicle. It's having things that you may not ever need, but it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it, type of thing. So that's also where the preparation separates itself from planning. Planning, you're kind of assuming that certain things are going to happen and we should have these things in order for when these things happen. The preparation is, man, I don't know what's going to happen, but what should I have on hand, even at a bare minimum, just in case? The preparation is part of the just in case scenario, so that when something goes bad that you didn't think of, you can mitigate just how severe it is.
Well, there's also a different element to that as well, Chris, and I'm sure you'll agree, but if there's potential of any sort of injury or if it's a complex operation, you also have to have supervision, and not just supervision, you have to have the right supervision. So somebody who has been there, done that, has the t-shirt sort of thing, so that they can kind of notice when things are going out of whack. And they're not there to micromanage, but they are there to make sure that things go right and that nobody gets hurt.
Yeah, that's where the experience comes in, right? That's why having people on your team, whether they're in a leadership role or a supporting role, who have been in similar situations, that's why we as leaders need to listen to those people, because they've got institutional knowledge, they've got past experience of something very similar. So you want to always be kind of pinging your people, for lack of a better word, during the planning process to say, what are we missing here? What else should we be accounting for? In your experience, what should have been prepared for in the past that we need to be taking into consideration right now? And that's why that supervision is so important. It's having that second set of eyes that has seen it, done it, been there in some way, shape, or form, to be able to give you a reality check and say, hey, you know what? You're going out on a 10-mile hike. I would take more than just a little bottle of water with me. Be prepared, hydrate yourself, right? And this this is where you and I always talk about how leadership is not just a business thing. Leadership affects every point in your life. So this particular topic applies everywhere: business, life, family, civic duties, everything. Planning and preparation touches.
You're right. And when it comes to mitigating those risks as well, Michael, just also keep in mind that it's important for the leader of that operation to make sure that the people that get involved are the right people. And you can't do that unless you understand who your people are and
Yep.
you know their strengths and weaknesses, and not just their strengths and weaknesses, but where they are operationally strong, because you need people that can be critical thinkers. And so those people, so this is where some people may not agree with this, but you as the organizer should not necessarily be the one who knows all the answers.
No,
Some people think that they do.
they're wrong.
They are wrong. But knowing who to get involved, because your first planning session might only have 4 people, but then they're going to be like, oh, that's what we're doing. And then the next planning session, you're going to have 30 people. And then come time for the rock drill, you're going to have 150 people.
Mhm.
So just know that, get the right people there, people that can critically think, put things together, and understand what's supposed to happen so that you can make it happen the right way. I mean, that's why mom and dad usually have to plan the family vacations, because if you get the kids involved in the beginning, good Lord, you might as well just pay for a ticket to the circus.
That's right. And not only just pay for a ticket to the circus, but you're showing up in the clothes that you're wearing. You don't have any other clothes for the rest of the time that you're at the circus. And it's just like, let's rock and roll. Let's go.
So I have a story, right? We gave full checklists for my first deployment. No, sorry, second deployment, because I was in a leadership position at the time. We made sure that we inspected everybody's gear before they went in the conics that we shipped ahead of time, that would show up on ground before we got to the combat zone. They had things like underwear, socks, extra deodorant, all of the really, really important things so that you can have extras when you're down there, because there might not be a store where you're going, right? I showed up to do one of my guys' inspections, and I opened up his container that he was putting in the Connex. You'll never guess what he had in there.
I can't even imagine.
A tiny little stereo with 2 speakers.
Okay. Hey,
And
man, priorities.
oh my gosh. And So this is why you have to make sure that you do rock drills and you prepare and you do things ahead of time. Because if you would have just let that guy on the day of throw that in the Connex, that dude wouldn't have had any skivvies or anything for the entire deployment unless he had family send them to him.
Oh man. So, and you know what? It applies to adults and everybody. My one son, I've got 3 teenage boys, but the one last summer was going away to the beach for like 4 days with a youth group, and I remember getting ready to take him to the church to meet up with everybody, and he comes downstairs with this like little bag, and I'm like, "What's in the bag, dude?" He's like, "My stuff for the next 4 days." What's in there? A bathing suit. What else? An extra shirt. Anything else? He's like, "Well, when I go swimming, I can just hang up my bathing suit and let it dry." Like, what about underwear? What about socks, shoes? Like, so we had to make a list. I'm like, all right, we should have done this. That was a failure of my part for not saying, hey, you're a teenager and I should help you to make a list of the things that you'll need to be away from home for 4 days.
Hey man, 25-year-olds go out into a training area in 105-degree heat with just a tiny little thing of water, and they
Yes,
won't drink it unless you tell them to. So, I mean, when they're teenagers, you got to realize that it's even less than that.
that's right.
It's not, and you know what? It's not their fault.
Right.
When we start off on our basics, we've talked about this before. You have to cry for everything you need. So, I mean, if that's where they started just 18 years before that, or 25 years before that, I mean, the fact that they're able to critically think at all and know that they need a swimsuit at all instead of just shorts and no shirt, then that's a win.
Yeah, totally agree.
Oh, that's great, dude. I've had fun with this one. Oh, Michael said something here.
Yeah. So
He,
if you don't
actually, that's a
plan, you're
good one.
lost. All right, go for it, JJ.
This is a good one. If you don't plan, you're lost. If you're a leader, you still don't know everything. You need to be willing to get rid of your ego and ask for help from people who may have better ideas than you. Dude, this doesn't just apply to planning and preparation.
Right.
You got to put your ego aside all the time, because when you're a leader, it's not about you. It's
That's right.
about making sure everything is squared away within your sphere of influence.
Yep. It applies to everything. It applies even when you're not in a leadership role.
Yes.
If you just if you're just part of a group and you want the outcome, whatever is going on, to be successful, you need to put the ego aside. Sometimes you have to let other people lead, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Nope.
You know what? Step back and say, hey, you've done this before, and I'm going to take your lead. I'm going to follow you. You let me know how I can support you. That's one of the most critical things that you can do as an individual, is know when to lead and when not to lead.
As a matter of fact, sometimes those are developmental opportunities for whoever else is involved. If it's at work or even in your house, sometimes you got to let, if you have your 15 or 16-year-old kid who thinks, by the way, that they're like the smartest person in the house, whether they are or not, and they start wanting to take charge of something, give them a little bit of room, and do not micromanage them. Kind of guide them through the process. And by the way, you want them to be able to do those things when they move out of the house. So putting your ego aside is important for almost everything that you do. And by the way, you don't have to be a manager or a supervisor or a director to be a leader in your organization. I've worked in organizations where there were truck drivers that you would see them out in a yard when they were shuffling trailers around, and they would park their truck and they would get out and show people how to make things better, how to do a better job at doing things. And that is leading the way. You don't have to be a manager to be a leader.
Yeah, you don't need the title.
By the way, not all managers are leaders anyway.
Correct.
There's a difference.
Yep. And
that can be a whole other call. I think we've done it before, but we can do that one again.
Yeah, and the title doesn't mean shit. You don't
No,
need a title to be able to step up and lead.
correct. But we are at almost 30 minutes, so I think we
Yeah.
can make this happen in the next 60 seconds. But do you have any closing comments, Chris?
Closing comments are understand the difference between planning and preparation, and then always think about what am I missing? What am I not considering in this scenario? And ask for help from other people to get their input to help you to be better prepared.
Yes. Oh, shoot. Look who popped on. Okay. Shout out to my boy, DB the therapist. What's up, my man? How you doing? I'm an ambassador for my organization. Dude, if you're going to be working with me, you better doggone lead from the front. I'm just saying that right now. Okay. That's all I got to say. You're the man, though, so I don't have any problems with it. I don't have any other closing comments either, Chris. Thank you for everybody who joined on during the call. I got nothing but love for y'all. Thank you for continuously showing support. And by the way, I hope the things that you learn, you pass on to other people. Yes. And communicate with us on this. So if you like this content, like, subscribe, share, do all of those things, but comment below so we can keep the conversation going. Take care, everybody. God bless.
See ya.